Welcome, friends, to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is the second class in this series, and we are exploring the 7th stanza in the first volume of the Secret Doctrine. This 7th stanza talks about the birth of humanity on Earth, more specifically about the parents of humanity, meaning the hierarchies of beings, the celestial beings that are involved in the evolution and the emanation of the vehicles of consciousness that the human monad will use. So in our last class, we have explored the first 2 shlokas in this stanza, and today we are going to continue with the stanza with shloka 3 and a couple more. So let us begin by reading shloka 3. When the one becomes 2, the threefold appears. The 3 are linked into one, and it is our thread, all anew, the heart of the man plant called Saptaparna. So as usual, we'll go line by line and explain the meaning. The shloka begins saying, when the one becomes 2, the threefold appears. And Blavatsky explains, when the one eternal drops its reflection into the region of manifestation, that reflection, the ray, differentiates the water of space. Chaos becomes male-female, and water incubated through light, and the threefold being issues as its firstborn. This is the metaphysical explanation and refers to the very beginning of evolution, or as we should rather say, of theogony. So as HPB says here, this first line in the shloka is referring to the beginning of evolution, when the one begins to differentiate. If we look in this diagram, we have the one eternal, which could be seen as the unmanifested logos, the first logos. And this is the source of all kinds of consciousness in the universe. In the context of this stanza, what the stanza is interested in is following the development of these celestial beings. This is what Blavatsky was calling theogony, the genesis of the gods. So this one eternal that is unmanifested sends a ray of itself into the world of manifestation. Now, what is there at the very beginning, is what Blavatsky calls here, or the shloka calls here, the waters of space, which is a symbol for the primordial matter. We saw all this in previous series, but this is a good summary so that we keep it in mind. So at the beginning, the primordial substance or matter, these waters of space, are undifferentiated. As soon as the ray from the one eternal, from the unmanifested logos, falls into the waters, then they begin to differentiate. So chaos, which is another name for the primordial substance, is now male-female. It's not yet a duality, but the first thing that happens in this process of differentiation is that matter becomes polarized, the positive and the negative together forming a neutral atom, let's say. So the ray makes the waters of space polarize and become the male-female chaos, and that ray, as the light, is the inner force to keep on this differentiation so that duality appears. When duality appears from the 1 into 2, then the threefold is born. The threefold can be seen as the 2 opposites, and that which unites the opposites, those are the 3 elements, for example, this threefold being is the firstborn. And we could take this threefold being as the manifested logos, which is the source of all the hierarchies of celestial beings that we are exploring in this stanza. Now, this can also be interpreted in terms of a human being, how a human being comes out of the unity by means of a similar process, but applied to what Blavatsky calls the microcosm, which is the little universe that a human being is. But Blavatsky says that trying to explain this stanza in that way will be done, or explaining the stanza in this way will be done in the second volume. So we will defer that until later classes. Now, these three principles are linked into one, and it is our thread, all anu, the heart of the man plant called Saptaparna. So now the shloka is applying it more specifically to a human being. So these three fundamental principles that are linked into one, this is the triple monad, the divine spark that has three aspects in a human being. And this is, the shloka says, the heart of the man plant, and is called Saptaparna. So Blavatsky explains that this sentence of this shloka shows how archaic is the belief and the doctrine that man is sevenfold in its constitution. So she's referring to the idea of Saptaparna. Sapta means seven in Sanskrit. So she says in the book of Dzyan, that is a very ancient book, when referring to a human being, it is compared to this plant, the Saptaparna. So she says this idea of the sevenfold constitution is very ancient because it's already present in the book of Dzyan, which according to Blavatsky is one of the first books that have been written in the history of humanity. So she says it is evident that the man plant, Saptaparna, thus refers to the seven principles, and man is compared to the seven-leaved plant of this name, so sacred among Buddhists. So this is a picture of the Saptaparna, of this plant that, as you can see, has seven leaflets or leaves coming from the same germ. Here is the scientific name, Alstonia scolaris. And it's just a symbol that the stanzas use for a human being. Now, if we go to the human constitution, this would be the Saptaparna, the seven principles as we have explored in previous series. The three higher, the three in one, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, are the heart of the human being, meaning the spiritual heart, the essence of what we are. And then we have these four lower principles, Kama, Prana, Linga, Sharira, and physical. We could translate Kama as the source of desires and passions, Prana as the vitality, the Linga, Sharira is an ethereal double of the physical body that we are going to see is important in the process of development of humanity. We will talk about that today. And the physical body, which is the aspect of a human being that we can perceive with our five senses. So this is the representation of the sevenfold constitution. Atma, the universal self, Buddhi, the source of wisdom, and Manas, the source of intelligence, of the mind and self-consciousness. All this being the heart of what a human being is, symbolically speaking. And these three elements into one is the thread of being which animates man and passes through all his personalities or rebirth on this earth. And Blavatsky says this is an allusion to Sutratma, which we already saw in the previous class. So the idea is that this thread are those three higher principles that remain throughout the whole process of evolution of humanity. And the four lower principles are temporary manifestations that could be seen as beads that are added to this thread. And each one of these is the personality. At the end of a lifetime, those lower principles are dissolved and everything comes back to the thread, to the heart of a human being, to the three higher principles. And after a while, another incarnation comes, and so on. So that is the idea that this thread, this constant, this spiritual continuity is represented by the three higher principles. Now, this thread, these three higher principles, so the thread is spun from the essence of the threefold, the fourfold, and the fivefold, which contain all the preceding. So remember that we saw in the previous class how the different hierarchies of celestial beings, they, as they became more and more concrete, as they expressed in lower planes, they become more complex. So the first one is just a unity. The second one is the twofold, is made of two elements. This again allegorically. And then the threefold represents the third order, the fourfold, the fourth, and the fivefold, the fifth. So the idea here is that these three higher principles, or the arrangement of these three higher principles, so that they can express the universal self in an individual way. You know, my three higher principles seem to be an individuality that is different from yours. That is certainly true on the lower planes. On the higher planes, we are all one. But the working on these three higher principles so that they become a vehicle of the universal self, for that, these three hierarchies of beings are necessary. So, just as a reminder of what we saw in the previous class, the third order, Blavatsky says, cement the buddhi to Atman. Atman is the universal self, buddhi is the first differentiation, and the higher attributes of manas. So you see how Atma, buddhi, and manas are involved here. So the fourth order, we said, is this reincarnating entity, the nursery of human conscious spiritual souls. That's what we are at the level of that is this entity that is evolving, that the other orders are helping to be embodied even on the higher planes. You know, this work of cementing buddhi to Atman and manas, all this is the work of creating a spiritual body for this order, that is the fourth one. And then the fifth order helps to activate this principle of manas in humanity, as we are going to see, and also the vehicle of manas, of the mind, which in the physical, on the lower planes, this vehicle is what we call kamarupa, is the source of emotions and desires. The mind, as we are going to see, needs a link to be able to express through the body, and this link is provided by this fourth principle, kama. So we can see how these three orders are involved in the evolution of the thread of the higher, as sometimes it is called in Theosophical literature, the higher ego of a human being. Now, this thread, these three principles, this is the root that never dies, the three-tongued flame of the four wicks. The wicks are the sparks that draw from the three-tongued flame, they are upper triad. Shot out by the seven, they are flame. The beams and sparks of one moon reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of earth, Bhumi or Prithvi. So let's see what this means. It is the root that never dies, the three-tongued flame of the four wicks. And Blavatsky explains the three-tongued flame that never dies is the immortal spiritual triad, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, what we have been just exploring. The fruition of the latter, of manas, is assimilated by the first two, by Atma and Buddhi, after every terrestrial life. So the idea, we cannot go into this here, but the idea is that the spiritual monad, the spark, part of its evolution depends on acquiring experience on the lower planes, on the physical, emotional, mental. All this experience is gathered by means of manas, by means of the mind. And whatever experience that is in tune with the spiritual nature of the monad, whatever experience that is gathered in tune with that, is absorbed by the monad. And therefore, in the process of evolution, the monad develops a spiritual sense of I-ness that at the beginning it doesn't have. So the 4 wicks that go out and are extinguished are the 4 lower principles, including the body. So in this imagery that the Sloka proposes now, we have a candle with 4 wicks that are the 4 lower principles, and that those are the vehicle for the expression of this 3-tongued flame. But as the flame expresses through them, the candle and the wicks are consumed. This is a metaphor of the human life. As the spiritual consciousness expresses through the body is gradually consumed. And when the body is consumed, when the time of death comes, the flame disappears from manifestation, but the spirit of the flame remains. Remember that in a previous session, this was a question that the teacher asked the disciple: where is the spirit of the flame? So the idea is that the 3-tongued flame is the manifestation of the spiritual consciousness through a personality. This all is trying to begin to show a little about the human constitution, what aspect is eternal, what aspect is temporary. And then the Sloka says, the wicks are the sparks, the beams and sparks of one moon reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of the earth. And Blavatsky explains, just as milliards of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean, above which one and the same moon is shining, so are evanescent personalities, the elusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego, twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. Maya is a Sanskrit word for illusion. The waves of Maya is an allegory for the life in the material realm, matter that is always in motion, matter that is always changing. And what the Sloka is showing here in another image is we have a moon which reflects on different rivers or different waters. So Blavatsky explained that these sparks last and appear as the thousands of sparks produced by the moonbeams, only so long as the queen of the night, the moon, radiates her luster on the running waters of life, the period of a Manvantara. Manvantara is a period of manifestation, of creation, if you want to call it that way. And then they disappear, the beams, symbols of our eternal spiritual egos, alone surviving, re-emerged in, and being, as they were before, one with the mother source. So let's see what is the symbol of this allegory. The idea is that the moon represents the universal self. The moon is always there, and the beings that come out of the moon are a representation for the different spiritual egos, these individual manifestations of the universal self that is what we are. Now, this spiritual ego is that eternal, undying thread or heart of the human being. when the moon, the beams that come from the moon are reflected on the waters of illusion, on the physical plane, we have different sparks that are, and the sparks last for a very short time compared to the moon that is always there, and the sparks appear and disappear as the waters move. So this is a symbol of the personalities, that the beam remains throughout the whole night. The whole night would represent the whole process or period of evolution, the Manvantara in this particular allegory. And then the sparks are all these different reflections from the light that comes from the moon, which are very ephemeral. So in a similar way, if you have watched this effect, it can be in a pond when the sun is reflecting there, or the moon is reflecting there, and you can see all these sparks coming and going. If you imagine that those are all the lives, the different personalities that are expressions of what you really are, you can get a certain sense of how ephemeral the material manifestation is, and how the real aspect of ourselves that remains when the sparks come and go is that light which is always there, which is our spiritual nature. So as you see, the shlokas are giving us several images, which I think they were meant to serve as a basis for meditation for the disciples. Now the next shloka, it says, the spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohat. We have seen in a previous series that Fohat is this cosmic energy that is behind the differentiation of everything in the universe. This spark journeys through the 7 worlds of Maya, the 7 worlds of illusion. It stops in the first kingdom and is a metal and a stone. It passes into the second kingdom, and behold, a plant. The plant whirls through 7 forms and becomes a sacred animal, the first shadow of the physical man. From the combined attributes of these, Manu, man, the thinker, is formed. Who forms him? The 7 lives and the 1 life. Who completes him? The 5-fold La. And who perfects the last body? Fesh, Sen, and Soma, the moon. So this is the 5th shloka, which has a lot of information there. So this will take most of our class today. So the spark hangs from the flame by the finest thread of Fohat. What is that spark which hangs from the flame? It is Jiva, the monad, in conjunction with Manas, or rather its aroma, like its spiritual essence, that which remains from each personality when worthy, and hangs from Atma Buddhi, the flame, by the thread of life. So in this particular way of using the metaphor, the flame represents the 2 higher principles, Atma Buddhi, and the spark here represents the 3rd principle, Manas, which we could say Atma Buddhi is like the spirit, the universal spirit, and Manas is the individual manifestation of that universal spirit. We could say that is our individual soul, which is an expression of the universal spirit. So the idea is that our soul, Manas, hangs from the flame, the universal spirit, by a finest thread of Fohat. So there is a connection of the universal with the individual by means of this Fohat, this cosmic energy that keeps things connected. because we could think, how is it that the universal spirit can be behind all the individual souls? And how is it that the souls can become a vehicle of expression of this universal spirit? There has to be some communication. And what the shloka is suggesting here is that communication is by means of fohat. And fohat, on the physical plane, as we explained in a previous series, fohat is represented by the electromagnetic forces. So we can see in science there is, or more than science, in philosophy, let's say, there is this question: how can the mind, which is immaterial, affect the body? When I move my hand, there is in consciousness a will to move the hand, but consciousness is not something material, unless you are a materialist. For some materialists, that's what they think, but many philosophers recognize that consciousness is not something material. But if that is the case, how can a movement in consciousness affect something that is material like the body? And the answer is that what we see in the body is that when there is a change in consciousness, that produces at the level of the cells of our body an electromagnetic, or say, nerve current. There is the electromagnetism is behind the communication of any change in consciousness to the brain, and from the brain to the rest of the body. So we can see how electromagnetism, from a physical point of view, is the bridge to communicate a change in consciousness into the body. So in a similar way, we don't really know what fohat means on the higher planes, how it manifests on the higher planes. But in a similar way, the universal spirit can be expressed through the individual soul, and that communication is mediated by fohat. Now, these three elements, this monad, the spark that is connected to the flame, journeys through the 7 worlds of Maya. And Blavatsky explains the phrase "through the 7 worlds of Maya" refers here to the 7 globes of the planetary chain and the 7 rounds, or the 49 stations of active existence that are before the spark, or the monad, at the beginning of every great life cycle, or manvantara. The thread of fohat is the thread of life before referred to. So here again there is a reference to this idea of the planetary chain. The 7 worlds of Maya are these 7 spheres on which all evolution, all evolution that we see on Earth, this is the field of evolution for all the species that we see on Earth. Earth is the more concrete, the densest of these globes. But evolution, according to the Theosophical view, begins on the spiritual planes, on a spiritual sphere, and little by little it goes down to more and more concrete spheres until it comes to the Earth. After finishing its evolution on Earth, it will go back to a higher sphere and higher until evolution goes back to the spiritual sphere. And then one cycle is accomplished, and after a period of rest, a new cycle begins. What Blavatsky says is that there are 7 of these cycles, 7 of these rounds around this planetary chain. Therefore, there are 49 stations, 49 stages. You see that in the shloka it said that the metal has to rotate or gyrate for 7 times before becoming a plant, and the plant again 7 times. The idea there is that we have these 7 stations, and within each of the 7 stations there are 7 cycles, so we have 49 cycles there. Now, the shloka says it stops in the first kingdom, so this divine monad stops when evolution begins, stops in the first kingdom, and it is a metal and a stone. Then it passes into the second kingdom, and behold a plant. Then the plant whirls through 7 forms and becomes a sacred animal. So Blavatsky says, the well-known Kabbalistic aphorism runs: a stone becomes a plant a beast, the beast a man a spirit, and the spirit a god. So this is an explanation or a statement of the stages of evolution after being a human being. When the human evolution is over, the human being becomes what here is called a spirit or an enlightened being, a Mahatma. And then after that evolution is over, then the human monad will begin to act as some of the other hierarchies of celestial beings that are builders of the cosmos. So this is what it is referred to as a god. So we can see how that sparks, as Blavatsky says here, the spark animates all the kingdoms in turn before it enters into and informs divine man. So the idea here is that the human monad, at the beginning of evolution, in the first round in this planetary chain, it has to pass through all the kingdoms of nature. So to experience, to assimilate the matter of the new system. This is, when a new planet begins and a new evolution begins, those monads that are human monads, in the first round, they have to go through all the kingdoms. Then afterwards, depending on the degree of evolution of each monad, they may not need to go through the lower kingdoms. Now Blavatsky explains then the monad or jiva is, first of all, shot down by the law of evolution into the lowest form of matter, the mineral. After a 7-fold gyration encased in the stone, or that which will become a mineral and a stone in the 4th round, in the 4th cycle, it creeps out of it, say, as a lichen. So the idea is that in the early evolution of the Earth, as science knows, the Earth was first, kind of a fiery ball, and then little by little it became more solid. So this early evolution, it takes place through what now we call minerals, but at the time the minerals were nothing like what we know today. And same with vegetables and animals. Then she says, passing thence through all the forms of vegetable matter into what is termed animal matter, it has now reached the point in which it has become the germ, so to speak, of the animal, that which will become physical man. All this, up to the 3rd round, is formless as matter and senseless as consciousness. So the idea is that these first 3 cycles of evolution, we are in the 4th cycle right now, the 4th round. These previous 3 cycles of evolution are not really conscious. These are like the gestation of a baby in the uterus. The baby is not really self-aware. There is some consciousness there because we see how the baby can respond to external sounds or external stimuli, but there is no self-consciousness. There is not an awakened mind that makes the baby realize that he's going through all this. So in a similar way, when the human monad has to go through all these lower kingdoms during the first part of evolution, that is a gestation stage in which there is nothing like consciousness as we understand it today. It is in the 4th round, as we are going to see next, that the full human being with a mind is developed. This is not too different, as I'm saying, the baby he's gestated and he is unaware. When he's born, he needs a few years, say 3 years. Psychology has seen that 3 years seems to be more or less the time that a baby needs to develop self-consciousness. So there are 3 years in which the mind is in a process of awakening. In a similar way with human beings, the first cycles of evolution go on without having an awakened mind. So the question is, if the monads that were evolving through this planetary chain, if the monads were unconscious, how was consciousness developed? So this is part of what the Sloka will explain next. So from the combined attributes of all these kingdoms that the monad went through, Manu, man, the thinker, is formed. So with all this evolution, as we were saying, there is this gestation of what we call a human being. Who forms him? The 7 lives and the 1 life. So Blavatsky explains, here Manu is a Sanskrit word, as I mentioned in a previous class, that means the thinker, and that Blavatsky says the word man is derived from Manu. So when she says man, she's not referring to male, she's referring to the thinker. So here Manu stands for the spiritual heavenly man, the real and non-dying ego in us, which is the direct emanation of the one life or the absolute deity. So as we said, see that Blavatsky every now and then keeps reminding us of the unity that is behind everything. So she says, we are talking about this higher ego, Atma Buddhi Manas, which is the individual expression of the unity. So she constantly refers back to the one life, the absolute deity. So the Sloka is asking here, or is saying here, the human being is formed from the combined attributes of all the kingdoms through which the monad evolved previously, but now it needs to be formed into a human being. So who forms him? First, it is said the 7 lives and the 1 life. And Blavatsky explains, besides the material or the matter that the monad is acquiring, allegorically speaking. So besides the material which will be needed for its future human form, the monad requires A spiritual model, a prototype for that material to shape itself into, and B, an intelligent consciousness to guide its evolution and progress, neither of which, the spiritual prototype or the intelligence, neither of which is possessed by the homogeneous monad or by the senseless, though living matter. So this is where we start examining specifically how the human being is formed. So far, the Sloka are talking about the general evolution of the monad before coming to the human kingdom. Now, once the monad is ready to begin to evolve through a human form, 2 things are needed, Blavatsky says here. One is a model on which the human form can be developed. This is something that belongs to the esoteric tradition. The idea is, according to the esoteric tradition, that for anything to take a particular form, a kind of subtle, ethereal model is needed. For example, when an embryo is developing in the uterus, we start from one cell that divides in 2, then in 4, etc. But at some point, these cells begin to arrange themselves in a particular form, in a particular way, that will generate the spinal cord, and then the different organs, and the heart, and the mouth, and the eyes. How do these cells know how they have to arrange themselves in order to produce all this differentiation? This is a scientific question, because when you try to reproduce that in the laboratory, if you just put a cell, to begin to develop on a medium where the cell can get its nutrition from, all you get is a flat sheet of cells. The cells don't begin to arrange themselves in the form of the organ, for example, that you want to develop. So scientists see that they need to provide a silicon form, for example, so that the cells will arrange themselves around this silicon model. But in the human body, you don't have that. So how do the cells figure out, the arrangement? Well, what the esoteric tradition says is that this is provided by the Linga Sharira, that Blavatsky calls it, this astral form, astral in the sense of subtle. Sometimes she also says it's an ethereal double of the body. This is a subtle model on which is invisible to the physical senses, but not to the cells. So the cells develop around this particular model. So where are the monads going to get this model so that the physical bodies can develop in a human form? That is one of the points. And the second is, where will the monads, which are divine sparks, get their mental intelligence? The mental intelligence doesn't really belong to the monad as Atma Buddhi, as this universal spirit. So again, some kind of help is needed for the mental intelligence to awake. So how is he to obtain all this? Blavatsky says, the occult doctrine teaches that while the monad is cycling on downward into matter, this very Elohim or Pitris, the lower Dhyan Chohans, this particular order of celestial beings, are evolving pari passu at the same time with the monad, but on a higher and more spiritual plane. After having reached a certain point, the Pitris, the celestial beings, and the monad will meet the incarnated senseless monad. So the Pitris, will meet the incarnating senseless monad. So in a little diagram, we have the Pitris who are evolving in their own plane, and the monads that have come down to the material planes, and the monads are evolving on the physical plane through mineral, vegetables, animals. When the time is ripe, when the monads are ready to start the evolution through a human form, then the Pitris come down from their plane where they were evolving, and they meet the monads, and from now on they evolve together. So these Pitris are the first help that the monad needs to generate a human form on the lower planes. Now, this group or of the hierarchy, which is commissioned to create physical men, is the sixth order. This Pitris is the sixth on the downward scale of spirituality. The last and seventh order being the terrestrial spirits, the elementals, which gradually form, build, and condense his physical body. So, in the formation of the physical body, we have two orders. The sixth order, which are the Pitris, and the seventh order, which are the nature spirits, the elementals. These two orders of celestial beings will form the physical body, or help forming the physical body of the new human beings. Blavatsky explains this sixth group evolves no more than the future men's shadowy form, a filmy, hardly visible, transparent copy of themselves. How do they do this? The Petries shoot out from their ethereal bodies still more ethereal and shadowy similitudes of themselves, or what we could now call doubles or astral forms, in their own likeness. So this sixth order is not physical. These are not physical beings. Human beings are physical. These are non-physical beings, but they are very close to the physical matter. So these Petries can produce out of themselves, just as we said that the mother out of her own substance produces a baby, the Petries out of their own substance emanate or produce this model, this ethereal double of the physical body, and then the nature spirits will guide the physical matter, the atoms and the cells, to be built around this model. So this is what happens when a baby is being gestated. The baby receives this ethereal double, this astral form, and the nature spirits, the forces of nature, which are beyond the realm of what science can see, can measure, they guide the cells into developing in these different ways, with these following these forms, according to the model that this ethereal double is presenting to them. So we can see here how the monad is provided of a physical body to begin to experience life on the physical plane by means of a human form. So far, the monad experienced life on the physical plane as an animal, a plant, or a mineral, but now this is the beginning of human evolution. So Blavatsky says this furnishes the monad with its first dwelling, and blind matter with a model around and upon which to build henceforth. But man is still incomplete. Why is it still incomplete? Well, because the monad represents the spirit in man, and the Petries and the nature spirits can form a body, but there is no communication between the spirit and the body. What is needed to act as a bridge between the monad and the body is a soul or a mind, and this is not available to the monad at this point in evolution. At the beginning of human evolution, the monad begins to incarnate in a physical body, but the mind is not awakened. So the monad remains within a physical body, unconscious. Again, we can take the analogy of a baby. In the baby, there is a spirit that is incarnated, but until the baby can develop a certain mind, that spirit is not really aware on the physical plane. So something similar happened at the beginning of human evolution. Now, who completes the human being? So this is the next question. We have already developed a physical vehicle, a physical tabernacle for the monad, but the human being is still incomplete. Who completes him? And the answer is the fivefold Hla. Hla is a Tibetan word for spirit. So the idea is that the fifth order of celestial beings are the ones that will come and complete the human beings. So Blavatsky says, it becomes the task of the fifth hierarchy to inform the empty and ethereal animal form, animal in the sense is already a human form, but is animal because it's devoid of a mind. So it's the task of this fifth order to inform the empty and ethereal form and make of it a rational man. This is one of those subjects upon which very little may be said to the general public. Even though little can be said, Blavatsky writes quite a bit about it, especially in the second volume. So we will see all this in far more detail in the second part of this series. It is only when, from a potential androgyne, man has become separated into male and female, that he will be endowed with his conscious, rational, individual soul, manas. As we are going to see later, more in detail, there is a long period of evolution in humanity that goes on without having an awakened mind. Because in this first period of evolution, what the goal of this first period is to generate a physical body that is good enough to receive the mind. The first forms of a physical body are very ethereal. As evolution proceeds, those forms become more and more concrete. The nervous system begins to develop, a good brain begins to develop, all that is necessary to be the vehicle of a mind. Remember that in the esoteric tradition, there is no creation. Creation that doesn't exist from the point of view of the esoteric tradition. Only evolution, gradual development. So you cannot have from the very beginning a perfect human body that will be able to host a mind. You need a period of evolution with that human body until it is ready to do so. So according to Blavatsky, at the beginning of evolution, human beings were hermaphrodites, and then as human beings became more and more concrete and more physical, then the sexes separated. They began to be closer to what we know today as a human being, although still very different. This is millions of years ago, far before what the physical fossils and remains that science has discovered so far. But she says, when the separation of sexes happened, then the bodies are mature enough for the mind to be awakened in them. So the principle or the intelligence of the Elohim, so this individual soul or manas, is the principle of intelligence that comes from the Elohim, from this fifth hierarchy of celestial beings, to receive which he has to eat the fruit of knowledge from the tree of good and evil. So in Blavatsky's view, this story in the Old Testament of Adam and Eve eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is an allegory of the moment in which humanity acquired a mind. Once humanity acquires a mind, begins a properly speaking human life, and is expelled from the paradise in which animals live. Animals are taken care of by nature, but as soon as the monad begins to evolve through a human body, and the human intelligence makes human beings or take human beings outside of the paradise, because now we need more than just the natural life that nature can give for our further evolution. We begin to develop social, intellectual, cultural aspects that takes us out of nature in a sense. So here we have a summary of these different orders and how they interact. So our fourth order is related to the spirit. Remember that also the third order, third, fourth, and fifth order are all related to the three higher principles. But just to make it simpler here, we have the fourth order, that is who we are. That could be the representative of the spirit. The fifth order, the one that we are talking about right now, is involved in providing human beings with a soul. This is again allegorical, but this in some way these celestial beings are involved in perhaps creating a vehicle of consciousness at the level of the mental plane of manas, so that the mind can be expressed now through a physical body. And then the 6th and 7th order, as we saw, are involved in forming the physical body. So you can see how the creation of a human being involves this work from all the different hierarchies of celestial beings. This is a team effort, in a sense, as anything else in the universe. But the esoteric philosophy is showing the background of what we see physically. Science sees physically that forms evolve. And it seems like this happens automatically, mechanically, by random mutations and random events. Well, the esoteric philosophy is saying that is not at all what is going on. Science cannot see, what is going on behind scenes on the non-physical levels. And there is a lot of work and many entities that are involved in producing what we see as a physical human being. And finally, and who perfects the last body? Fish, sin, and soma, the moon. Blavatsky says fish, sin, and the moon have to do with the divine perfect man. Everything, since fish, sin, and moon make conjointly the three symbols of the immortal being. So in some way, who perfects the last body, that is talking about the final evolution of humanity. When humanity becomes, or a human being becomes perfect, what we can call today an enlightened being, what is involved there, or who are involved in this? And the Sloka says fish, sin, and the moon, and soma. Blavatsky says that she doesn't really explain much what this means. She says, this is all that can be given, nor does the writer pretend to know more of this strange symbol, which underlies the Matsya, the fish avatar of Vishnu, the Chaldean Oannes, the man-fish recorded in the imperishable sign of the zodiac, Pisces, and running throughout the two testaments in the personages of Joshua, the son of the fish, Nun, and Jesus. So first she says that there is something going on with the idea of fish. The first avatar in Hinduism, which is avatar is a divine incarnation, is Matsya, which had the form of a fish. And then in the Chaldean religion, also there is a divine incarnation, Oannes, which was a man-fish. Then Jesus is connected to the idea of fish. So she says, fish in some way is a representation to the divine incarnated. Then she says, the word sin is curious, but has a particular occult relation to the moon, besides being its Chaldean equivalent. The allegorical sin refers to the fall of spirit into matter, and the moon relates to the lunar ancestors, the Pitris. So we could say that the combination of the incarnated divinity, which is represented by fish, the fall of that divinity into matter so that it can evolve, and the help of the Pitris that come from the moon, allegorically speaking. We will see all this in the second section, but the moon represents this sixth order of Pitris that form the body. So probably these three elements, the divine that needs to be incarnated, the falling into matter, and the creation of a physical body by the lunar Pitris, all these elements are what eventually produce the perfect man, the divine human being. So that's what we have for today. I hope to see you next week.